Yo, book nerds, it's nonfiction November, so I thought I would do a nonfiction book tag. I actually saw this video first done on Books with Emily Fox's channel, but the original tag is from a book olive, so I will link both of those in the description for you to check out. But let's get into it. So question 1 is, how much nonfiction do you read? And I'm going to be honest, I don't currently read a ton of nonfiction. I used to read more. I used to try to read at least one a year, usually more than one a year. And often I would participate in Nonfiction November. And so I would for sure at least get one in November. But I would try to sprinkle others throughout the year as well. But since I started grad school, I really haven't read a ton of nonfiction. I've read some, but it's slowed down a lot because I've been reading so much nonfiction for grad school. So reading nonfiction for fun, for my own personal pleasure and enjoyment, has really slowed down because of that. That's actually part of the reason I'm doing this video. On a previous video of mine, I can't remember which one right now, but somebody had commented saying that my channel is definitely a fiction channel, and they're not wrong. I mostly read fiction. That's very accurate, but I do love nonfiction too. I just don't read it as often. And so it was kind of a little wake-up call for me because I really want to get back into reading more nonfiction. And so that comment kind of got me thinking about what I've read that's nonfiction, what I want to read, and kind of reoriented my thoughts, and just it's kind of got me back on track. Question 2 is, what kind of nonfiction videos do you make / do you want to make on Booktube? And I really just have stuck to 2 different kinds. I have reviews, and then I've done some recommendations videos. So that's really the extent of it. I don't really know what other kinds of videos I would do. I think those are pretty standard. So I guess if you have any ideas or suggestions on types of videos, I guess I could do like a top 5 or top 10 nonfiction books I've read video. But that's what I've done, and suggestions by you guys are always welcome. Question 3 is, what is your favorite subgenre of nonfiction? And for me, I guess I've always loved history. When I first started college, I was actually going for history, and then I changed my undergrad to creative and professional writing. So I love history, so I like to read historical books about periods of time or events that I'm interested in. I also really love a good memoir, especially if it's a person that I'm interested in. I really gravitate towards those. But I've read a little bit of everything. I've read some inspirational, I've read some self-help, I've read some true crime. I've kind of got a little sprinkling, but I gravitate towards those typical historical kind of nonfiction. Question 4, do you have a favorite nonfiction book? And honestly, I have to say The Diary of Anne Frank. I have read this book, I think 3 times, and I get something new out of it each time. It kind of combines what I said my interests were, historical events, the Holocaust, World War II, combined with a person I'm interested in, Anne Frank. So it kind of hits all those things for me, and it's just a very powerful book if you haven't read it. Question 5, what do you think keeps people from wanting to read more nonfiction? I think there's this misconception that nonfiction is boring, that nonfiction is too much like school. When you're in school, you read a lot of nonfiction across subjects. So I think there's this idea that nonfiction is boring, or it's only for educational purposes. It's not for entertainment or personal enjoyment. And those thoughts might be valid to your experience. Maybe that's why you don't like nonfiction. But I think more people would open up to nonfiction if they kind of got over that misconception, because some of the nonfiction that I've read have been so, so good. Such amazing stories, and it's real life. Sometimes in fiction, like take fantasy, for example, things can be just so out there that maybe it's a little hard to relate, but if you read a nonfiction of someone's story, maybe you can relate to it a little bit more. That's just one example, but I think that's the reason why a lot of people don't read it, is because they think it's going to be boring or it's going to be like school. Question 6 is, why do you like nonfiction? Why do I like it? I like it because I get to explore things I'm interested in. I really love history, like I said, so I get to pick what I'm learning about. When I was in school, like, you had to learn the curriculum. You didn't get to choose. So like I get to dive deeper into subjects, into periods of time, into people that interest me, that I want to learn more about. Question 7, what's a nonfiction book you read because of Booktube? And there actually haven't been any books on Booktube that I've like heard other people talk about that then I went out and read. I have added some to my TBR, and there's one that stands out to me that I don't actually own yet, but I have wanted to buy and add to my TBR, and that is I'm Happy My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, and I want to read that because, first of all, I was always a fan of her growing up, and I think, like, personally, like, I have a great relationship with my mom, and sometimes it can be hard to like wrap my head around the fact that not everyone has that. And so I think it would be interesting to read about someone's experience that's very different than mine. So that's one that I really want to get, and that I want to get that because I've seen it talked about so much on Booktube. But looking at this question a different way, there is one book that I kind of read because of Booktube. I had set a challenge for myself a few years ago to read books that have been on my shelf for a very long time, that have been on my TBR for a very long time, to try and like move them off of that. And one of those books was a nonfiction. And so like you could say I read it because of Booktube, because if it weren't for Booktube, I wouldn't have made that goal, and then I wouldn't have read this book. I probably would have read it eventually, but who knows when. So, and that book was Glenn Sheen's Daughter, the Marjorie Congdon Story by Sharon Darby Hendry. This was amazing. So that I did kind of read this one for Booktube, but it wasn't solely because of Booktube that I read it. Like, I would have read it eventually on my own. Question 8. What's the best nonfiction book you've read lately? And honestly, Glenn Sheen's Daughter. Like, this book was incredible. The story was riveting. It's a true crime story. And the people in this, oh my God, they're crazy. It's such a wild ride of a story, and I just couldn't put it down. I was riveted. But since I already said this for a different question, I'll give you one more. And that would be The Tudors, The Complete Story of England's Most Notorious Dynasty by G.J. Meyer. This book was phenomenal. I am obsessed with Tudor England, and I've taken classes on Tudor England. A lot of people have like seen the Tudors TV show, the adaptation, which is a decent adaptation. I'll give it that. I have some issues with it, but I've done a lot of research on the Tudors already, like in school and just on my own. And so I went into this already having background knowledge, and so I was kind of skeptical on how good this would be, but it was phenomenal. It fleshed out that era so well. It gave me information on the state of England before the Tudors, during the Tudors, and after. And it gave you everything from the king down to the peasants, and the economy, and what life was like for people back then. Like, it was a great read. So if you're interested in the Tudors, I definitely recommend this book. I thought it was wonderful. I will admit I'm not a historian, but for just like a common person like me, I thought this was wonderful. It read like a fiction story at some points. Like, it didn't read like a textbook. which I think also off-puts a lot of people to nonfiction, that some nonfictions read more like a textbook. This did not read like that at all, but you got information on every page. It was jam-packed with awesome, awesome information. Question 9, what are some of your nonfiction reading goals? So basically, I would just like to get back to reading more nonfiction that's not for grad school. I need to get back into that habit, and I am close to being done with grad school too, so I think that it will be easier, I'll have more time, and I won't feel so burned out from reading so much grad school stuff that I will want to pick up more nonfiction on my own. I have a lot of nonfiction on my TBR. I'm really interested in like the world wars, so I have books on those. I also have nonfictions like memoirs for people that I'm interested in, like Matthew Perry. I really want to read his memoir. Now that grad school is ending, like I want to pick up some like teaching books, like books on education and teaching practices, like going forward, to just keep myself accountable and just keep myself learning new practices and developing my pedagogy and just growing as a teacher in that way too. Question 10, what's your advice for incorporating more nonfiction into your reading diet? First of all, you can start simple. Just participate in Nonfiction November. Read one nonfiction in November each year. And when it comes to picking a nonfiction, then you need to just find what subgenres work for you. So dabble in a few different things. It's not just historical books and memoirs that you can read. You've got self-help, you've got inspirational, true crime, there's educational ones, yes. Like there's so many genres that you can dive into in nonfiction that like if one doesn't work for you, it doesn't mean another one won't work for you. So you just got to put your feelers out there and try some. It also does help, like if you find something that interests you, like if there's a person you want to learn more about, find a memoir or an autobiography or biography. If there's an event in history or a period of time you want to learn about, find those. If there's something that you want to know how it works. Like I know people that love cars, so they read lots of books on cars. I know some people that like bands, so they'll read about different bands and things like that. Like you just got to find things that interest you and then find nonfiction books that incorporate that. I hope that this video gets you thinking about nonfiction. It definitely has stirred it up inside me. Like I want to get back to reading more nonfiction, and it's Nonfiction November, so it's a perfect time to be thinking about these things. If you're participating in Nonfiction November, let me know what you're reading in the comments. If you have nonfiction books that you recommend, let me know and share with others. Let's get nonfiction on Booktube a little more. It's not something that's talked about on many Booktube channels. Like it's not very common, and so we gotta start the conversation because there's some great nonfiction books out there. I hope you're having a wonderful Nonfiction November, and I will talk to you all again soon. Hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks for talking books with me.